From Carl Jung to Albert Camus, Sisyphus, and the Bhagavad Gita, Robert F. Kennedy has expressed how he came into a personal relationship with God and showcased what he believes his purpose is through his religious beliefs and syncretism. As we look at RFK Jr.'s search for meaning and how it might affect his upcoming position in our nation's Health and Human Services Department. Stay with us as we look at these and other stories on the 511 News. Welcome back to the 511 News. I'm your host, Chad Davidson of Good Fight Ministries. And on today's episode, we're going to be looking at the search for meaning that RFK has expressed not only on different interviews, whether with George Janko or Sage Steele or Joe Rogan, but ultimately see how these views affect how somebody may practice their beliefs. Because the truth is, as we're going to see, that beliefs have consequences. Now, before we get into that, we would love for you to like this video as well as subscribe to the Good Fight Ministries YouTube channel. And if you're listening to this via podcast, just please leave a 5-star review. All of those things simply help for this to get out more. And we're always hoping these messages reach more and more people. Hey there, guys, just interrupting this episode real quick to showcase to you our new trailer for our brand new project. Check it out here.
Hi, I'm Stan Lee, editor of the Marvel Comics group of superhero comic magazines.
Did Stan Lee, the human face behind Marvel Comics that inspired the greatest movie genre in human history, have a dark and nefarious agenda? Did Stan Lee seek to distort the one true God into a bumbling creator unworthy of worship? Did Lee and Marvel Comics portray Satan as a real hero or savior of humanity? Did Stan Lee use his comics to promote what the Bible calls the coming strong delusion, whereby the world is deceived to receive the final Antichrist?
Are you afraid of dying?
No, not at all.
Do you think you go somewhere?
No. I feel when you die, there's just nothing.
Yes, that's right. This is our next installment for our series on Marvel and DC's War on God. This one specifically is Stan Lee, God, and the Devil. And if you want to watch it before it comes out in January, which everyone will be able to see it at that point, you can become a Patreon right now at the $10 tier or above. And guess what? You get to see it a couple weeks before anyone else. So we would love for you to check it out. And now back to the episode. We want to look at RFK Jr. He has been a popular figure. A lot of people are pointing out, hey, I really love that he's saying, hey, these seed oils that have come in, they are bad for our health. A lot of people are saying, look, this guy is pretty late in life, and guess what? He looks pretty good, a lot better than the previous Health and Human Resource Service Department head of our country. But nonetheless, there are some things when you know some of his worldview, when you actually understand some of the things he pushes, not only psychedelics, that's not something we're going to delve into here, but I do believe when we actually look at some of the things he believes, that there's a factor here. There's a reason why this stuff is being pushed, whether it's from Sean Ryan, whether it is from Aaron Rodgers or Aubrey Marcus or Joe Rogan himself. Those are being pushed, but that would be for another episode. And I've even reached out to those who are more of an expert in that field to talk about that subject. And if they end up talking about it, we'll leave a link in the description. But on this episode, we want to look at basically 3 different philosophies or religious backgrounds, things that he has quoted, talked about in interviews, and showcase them. And you can kind of look and decide whether or not these worldviews that he kind of synchronizes, whether or not you believe they have an effect on some of the policies that he might push. And the first thing that I noticed, actually, it was the last of the interviews I watched concerning his worldview, was with Sage Steele. And in this interview, he actually expresses how he himself, who grew up as a Catholic with the Kennedy family, now holds to a belief in God and basically what it was that drove him to believing that there truly is a God and that seemingly that God is somewhat personal.
Within a year after my dad's death, I was addicted to heroin. I was addicted for 14 years. I quit when I was 28 years old. And during that period, when I was in early recovery, is when all of these things started to make sense to me. My Catholic upbringing, all of this confluence of philosophy and theology and self-examination and pain that you go through. We grow through pain. You know, pain is ultimately the touchstone of spiritual growth. And addicts have a unique opportunity for redemption because they've been to hell. It destroys your life, and it destroys your relationships, and it hurts everybody that you love, and it makes you into a liar. Whenever you're living against conscience, which you're doing if you're addicted, you push God over the periphery of your horizon. So there is a complete disconnection. When I finally got sober, I came in, with my life wrecked, and I came in on my knees, and I made a decision. I knew I needed a spiritual realignment. And then I picked up this book by Carl Jung called Synchronicity. It was a kind of synchronicity that it was sitting on a table. And the reason I picked it up was because there was an album by The Police that had just been released, and it had the same name, and I didn't know what the word was. So I picked it up out of curiosity. And synchronicity is a coincidence. It's like one of those things that happens to all of us when we start noticing them. It happens more often. An example would be you're talking about somebody who you haven't seen or thought about in 20 years. And the phone rings and it's that person on the phone. And these little things happen to us all the time, right? And Jung saw those as interventions by God who would reach through the universe and break all of his own rules, the rules of mathematics, arithmetic, of percentages of chance, and of time and space, would reach through and do these little things to touch us on the shoulder and kind of say, I'm here, you're looking at a miracle. And Jung was a deeply spiritual man. Jung began having these very authentic spiritual experiences when he was a kid. And he remembers the dreams that he had and these synchronicities, other authentic spiritual experiences that kind of guided his life in this extraordinary way. What he says is that I can't use empirical tools and scientific tools to prove the existence of a God, but that I can prove that, having seen tens of thousands of patients come through his hospital, that people who believe in God get better faster and that their recovery is more durable and enduring. And for me, reading that was much more impactful than if he had said that he had proven the existence of a God, which I would not have believed. Right. What he was saying was, it's irrelevant if there's a God up there or not. If you believe in one, your chances of living a healthier life and of recovery are better, and it's an easier path. And at that point in my life, I had made a vow that I would do anything at all, if it increased my chance of recovery by even 1%. But I made a decision, I'm going to start believing in God because it's going to improve my chance of recovery. And then I'm confronted with the dilemma of how do you start believing in something that you can't see or smell or touch or taste or hear or acquire with your senses. And Jung solves that problem by saying, fake it till you make it. Act as if. And he said, the faith will precede the evidence, that there will be evidence that will be overwhelming. I immediately, while I was reading this book, I said, okay, this is the answer. So I'm just going to start pretending there's a God up there, that he's looking at me all the time, and that life is kind of a test, and that, we're supposed to do the right thing, and I'm supposed to behave myself even when I don't have an audience, so even when nobody's watching me. The day I finished that book, I went out on a volleyball field. I was playing volleyball, and somebody hit the ball on a very, very powerful punch. It went way up, and then it came down and hit the top of the post, and it made this errant flight back up again. And as it was relaunching, I said, so that everybody on the field heard me, I said, that ball is going to get hit by a Mack truck. I don't know why I said that. I have no idea, but everybody heard me say it. And the ball went up and landed on a chain link fence, and then it bounced on the other side, and it rolled down about 40 yards into a main thoroughfare. And this giant 18-wheel diesel came by and popped it with just a resounding pop. And everybody looked at me for a second, or like, wow, how'd you do that? Oh, at that point, I had just finished this book about synchronicity. And I was like, okay, I can either just dismiss that the way that I would as a weird coincidence, or I can just say that, this is God's way of talking to me, and I'm going to accept that, and I'm going to accept the beauty of it.
Now, for those who don't know who Carl Jung is, he is very popular, especially if you have ever turned on anything where Jordan Peterson is talking for any amount of time. You might have heard the name Carl Jung, but people don't really understand ultimately who Carl Jung was. And one of, I think, the more modern and I think one of the more important people that expressed concerns regarding Jung and Jungian philosophy and psychotherapy and some of the views that he held and pushed coming into the church was the late and great Dave Hunt. And he expressed specifically who Carl Jung was, and you can hear right here some of the dangers of Jungian practices coming into the church and why it would be very dangerous.
Carl Jung, as you know, had his own spirit guide. In fact, his MD thesis was written on occult phenomena. And if I can find the quote here, Nandor Fodor, who has done a lot of writing in this area, listen to what he says. I'm quoting him now. The discussion of C.G. Jung's psychic participation must begin with taking a deep breath. It is a story so unbelievable that ever since it was fully revealed, analytic psychologists have been staggering under the impact. Psychoanalysts have ignored it as a fairy tale, and parapsychologists have found it a diet so rich that up to now they've not been able to digest it. Jung's doctoral thesis of 1899 was on the psychology and pathology of so-called occult phenomena. And as you know, Carl Jung said when he had a difficult case, he would consult an astrologist. He would consult the zodiac for his patients. You know that he picked up his own spirit guide. There was a period of 6 years when Carl Jung said he teetered on the brink of total psychotic collapse. And he was visited by the Holy Ghost, he said, in the form of a dove. He picked up his own spirit guide, Philemon, Philemon the demon, I call him. He said we walked up and down the garden together, arm in arm. He was as real to me as this was his guru. And many of his theories that he later passed on and that are even in the Church of Jesus Christ today through Christian psychologists, he got from Philemon, his spirit guide. Then he tells us also that on one occasion, a screeching chorus of ghosts came from Jerusalem and filled his home there outside of Zurich. I've been over there visiting the C.G. Jung Institute and so forth. And it was under their inspiration in 3 days and 3 nights that he wrote his major work, Septem Sermon ad Mortuum, the 7 Sermons to the Dead. He thought he was the pastor to the dead, that he was traveling with the spirits of the dead. I mean, when you study Carl Jung, who has influenced the church far more than Freud ever did, I mean, the man was an occultist.
Now, when you hear that, it is very disturbing to see some of those connections, and that this is this kind of synchronicity, as the book is called. And if you don't know anything about that book, you don't know anything about his understanding. He actually talks about this specific instance that would parallel what RFK Jr. talked about with the volleyball going in the air and him saying it's going to be hit by a Mack truck, and then it's hit by a Mack truck. That, some would say, oh, that was God speaking to him, and, maybe it was. But the way that Jung describes it sometimes is that the universe is speaking to us, and it's more of a pantheistic view of God, that God is ultimately in everything. And with Jung, an example that he uses that would parallel what had happened there with RFK Jr. and what he talks about in the book Synchronicity is a woman that was somebody who was rigid in their wanting reasons for belief in anything. And he wanted to express to her and show to her that, yes, that there is a God, or that the universe does care about her. And so she expressed a dream of a golden beetle, to which at this time, meeting with Jung, then Jung opened up a window because there was a scarab, a beetle there, and he showed her and used that to open her mind to the fact that the universe or God actually cares about her. Now, there is a lot of interesting things with Jung, and it would take multiple episodes to go through some of his teachings that have infiltrated the church with memory editing that you might see at Bethel and so forth. But when you actually see this and hear this, that this was the thing that kind of opened his mind, it starts to make sense of the other interviews where he has talked about some of his philosophy of life and some of RFK Jr.'s beliefs and how he gets meaning in these different things that he's fighting for and against. And I have found it interesting, something that Dave Hunt had said about the church specifically. He said if somebody showed up in a shamanistic outfit and then began doing these occult exercises, he would be thrown out of the church. But if he came in a lab coat, he would probably be accepted. And that has seemingly been the truth. And now it seems like some things are going to be accepted because they come with the seal of the United States government. And that's not something we want either. And when I was listening, and this is the first interview, if I'm being honest, I had ever heard, and it came out, I don't know, 6 months ago, with RFK Jr. on Joe Rogan. And I wanted to know his background, where he was with getting, shots and so forth. And when I looked at this interview, the thing that stuck out to me was the philosophy that he talked about. A philosophy that ultimately comes from absurdism, from the French Algerian philosopher Albert Camus, and his book, The Myth of Sisyphus. And here he is talking about it, and he gives a little background that this is shortly after JFK had his life taken from him. And after he was assassinated, his dad gave him this book because his dad was always a faithful Catholic, but now here he is giving a book that pushes the existential philosophy of absurdism. And you can hear him talk about it here.
Camus had written this book called The Plague. My father gave it to me, and he told me with this kind of peculiar intensity, I want you to read this. The book is about a doctor who is in a city in North Africa where there is an unnamed plague ravaging the city. It's a walled city and it's quarantined. And the plague is something nobody's ever seen before. And most of the people who get it are dying. It's a huge infection fatality rate. And a lot of the book, the beginning is this conversation the doctor is having to himself as he's locked, in his room. And he's trying to say, I don't want to go out there because if I go out there, I'm going to catch it. And I can't really help these people anyway because we don't know, anything about this disease. We don't know how to treat it. And everybody who gets it dies. So why don't I just stay here and wait it out? And then in the end, he ends up leaving and he ends up just comforting people. Camus was an existentialist, which are kind of the legatees of the Greek and Roman tradition of Stoicism. And what he was saying about this doctor is the doctor had brought order to the chaos of this, what was happening in the city, by doing his own duty and going out and being of service to other people, even at great sacrifice to himself. The iconic hero of Stoicism is Sisyphus. And Sisyphus is condemned by the gods because he does a good deed for humanity for eternity, to push a rock up a hill And then when he gets to the top of the hill of the boulder, he can never get it over the top. It always rolls back down and on top of him and kind of mangles him. And then he goes up and does it again. But in the Stoic cosmology, Sisyphus is a happy man because he put his shoulder to the stone. He was given a duty, and he does his duty, and that self-sacrifice that he makes brings order to a chaotic universe.
Now, I have read Camus in the past and read a lot of different philosophical works. And when it comes to Camus, one of the reasons it's very interesting is it comes juxtaposed against a couple of different philosophies, one of which would be that of Soren Kierkegaard that would say to take a leap of faith. And he would say, Camus that is, that this idea of a leap of faith, to just go and try to believe in something, which is actually exactly what RFK Jr. said he did when it came to wanting to get sober after being addicted to heroin for 14 years and realizing that people believe in God actually have a better rate of sobriety when they're trying to leave behind some of those drugs. He then took that leap of faith, and then eventually the reason came alongside of it. Camus would say the opposite. This is not what we want to do. So it is kind of a weird case of somebody saying, this is a philosophy I believe in, I believe in God from this endeavor that is exactly opposite, ultimately, which I just found very interesting. Nonetheless, absurdism is basically just accepting that nothing has meaning and living it out and basically having a cup of coffee because, hey, forget it, nothing really matters anyways, and just to embrace the absurdity. Somebody would also point out that this myth of Sisyphus, which is Albert Camus' probably his most popular work, that this pushes a what would be adapted as a Stoic mythology, one that would be very popular in Stoicism. And Sisyphus, for those who don't know, and this is probably for those that are Christians, this might, pique their interest, is the fact that Sisyphus is in mythology to be thought of as the founder of Corinth. So that's interesting by itself. And just to give his background fully, Sisyphus is even written about in the Homer's Iliad. He's very popular for people. Even Jocko Willink talks about him, and this idea that also is expressed here from RFK Jr. And Sisyphus himself is this crafty individual that not only is crafty and in leading Corinth and so forth, but also so crafty that even when he goes to be taken by death, by Thanatos is his name, he actually cheats death. And not only does he cheat death by having Thanatos actually show him how the chains work that will lock him up for eternity and then keeping Thanatos locked, what he does in that is makes him lock himself up. And so now death is stuck, locked up. And so no one dies. And then the god Ares, the god of war, gets upset and says, I'm going to release Thanatos, and does. And then once again, you have Sisyphus cheating death again after getting caught up. And so Sisyphus has this, crafty way of getting out of everything and ends up living an old life, then dying. But once he actually dies, he is forced for eternity to roll this big rock up a hill, and his entire goal is to get it over the hill. But every time he gets to the top, it rolls back over him and it hurts him. Now, this is what RFK Jr. says, this is my battle, and it's to embrace that fight. And a lot of Stoics today, especially modern Stoics, look at that as, you know what, let's just embrace the grind, so to speak. Let's keep going and pushing that boulder, because really the journey, that's what matters. The fight, that's what matters. And if you look at some images of Sisyphus, even though he's pushing the rock, there's this smirk there because he just loves the work. And a lot of people push that. And that ultimately, I think, is what he's pushing there with the myth of Sisyphus and advising or at least expressing this is what had a huge impact on him. But obviously those two are contradictory. And then in this next interview that I watched, this is with George Janko. And in this one, he starts talking because George begins to say, hey, your family disagrees with you and you guys are fighting about this. And what's going on there? What do you think about this? And here's his answer. And he actually quotes a story from the Bhagavad Gita.
There's a story in the Bhagavad Gita, which is part of the sort of the Bible for the Hindu religion, and it's a story. It's kind of the central story is about a civil war between between the great families in India, and one of the heroes of that book is a guy called Arjuna, and he's the sort of leading general and the prince who's on one side in this battle. His charioteer is a human iteration of our avatar of the god Shiva, and it's a very wise charioteer who is advising him, and he goes to for wisdom and advice. And Shiva never reveals himself until the very end of the book that he's actually the god Shiva. But by this time, Arjuna knows who it is, and he asks to be brought to the front line of the battle. And when he's on the front line, he sees that arrayed against him are all of his brothers and sisters and all of his cousins, and his entire family has taken the other side. And he breaks down at that point, and he says to Shiva, I can't do this. It would be morally wrong for me to fight my family and maybe kill them. And it can't be what the gods want me to do. This can't possibly be right. And Shiva says to him, he says, I've already killed you all. And he said, because he's telling him that, time is actually static, and he's saying to them, you have a duty, you have what he calls dharma. Yeah. It's what you were created to do. And that he said, you were created to be a fighter. If you didn't fight, it would be shameful. You'd be violent, even if the fight is causing injury to people that you love or whatever. A lot of the choices that we make during life are correct choices, and yet they hurt people who we love. They hurt people who don't deserve to be hurt. If you break up with your girlfriend because this relationship is not right, you still love her, but it's not right, so you do the right thing, and breaking up was hurtful. Yeah. And yet it's the correct thing to do.
Sometimes the best thing has the most pain.
Exactly. And so, dharma is what we were put here to do. And that, we can't be constantly accounting for all the cause of what we do. We have to focus on what we were meant to do. And I feel like, in some ways, I take wisdom from that story.
Now, the portion of the Bhagavad Gita that he speaks about there is the Battle of Kurukshetra. And that battle, and he talks about the specific person in that battle, the character Arjuna. And what's interesting is in that battle, it's one of the more famous battles in the Bhagavad Gita, and in that battle, you have a civil war kind of brewing. And when it's brewing, Arjuna actually has a struggle in terms of there's great people out here. I don't want to kill them. And ultimately, the answer that's given to him by one of the gods is, well, you know what? Everyone's going to live eternally anyways, and this is your purpose. This is your dharma. So how do I bring all of this together when understanding the synchronistic philosophy of RFK Jr. and how it affects how he looks at the world? And I just actually got a message from Will Spencer, who's going to be working on something regarding ayahuasca and psychedelics and RFK Jr., and I'll be excited to see what he comes out with regarding that. But I just want to look at these philosophies all put out in front of us. And here's the thing. I want to bring this out because not only our ideas, but our beliefs have consequences. And understanding that believing in the objective truth of God's word affects how we view all of these philosophies. So when we see in Colossians chapter 2, verse 8, that we are not to be taken captive by the deceptive philosophies of men, then we cannot take and synchronize all these different views from all these different false gods and ideologies and philosophers that will take us captive to simply say, I'm going to take a piece of this and a piece of this and a piece of this. What the Bible describes is to test all things and to hold fast to that which is true. So can you find nuggets of truth and virtue and so forth that are found in other religions? Yes, there'll be nuggets of truth, but if they don't align ultimately with what God is trying to do in showcasing his son to us and drawing us to himself, then we need to not only jettison that, but we cannot talk about these things simply unilaterally. We cannot talk about these things as if it's okay to just put these things on a table and figure out who is going to just say, this one's better than that one. We need to look at it and call it out for the very thing that is waging war against the soul. We need to look at these philosophies and say, these things are trying to take you away from the way, the truth, and the life, who is Jesus. These things are the false prophets mentioned in John chapter 10, that somebody is trying to come another way into the fold. And guess what? They're a thief and a robber. They're a liar. And we do not want to allow any of this philosophy to even look like it can come against the throne room of God, to even look like it has any weight whatsoever. What we need to look at it as is what it is, a demonic stronghold that somebody needs to not only have decimated, but that we need to make sure the light of life comes. And guess what? RFK Jr. is somebody, I'm praying for him as I studied this. I wanted to see what he believes. And this is a man's search for meaning. And it is a sad one when that meaning is not found in Christ. All of the philosophies, all of this stuff can be pushed aside. And the reality is we have the truth of the gospel of Jesus Christ. When you start studying the myth of Sisyphus, when you start studying stuff in the Bhagavad Gita, these battles that they talk about, when you realize the absurdity of absurdism, ultimately all of it falls and is crushed at the feet of Jesus and at his resurrection. All of it is done away with. The fact is that we can brag about the reality of the truthfulness of the gospel of Jesus Christ and know that they have nothing. All these philosophies of the world have nothing compared to the weight of the truth of the gospel, that Jesus Christ rising again on the third day, not simply in a book, not simply in an idea, but ultimately Jesus Christ rising again on the third day before many witnesses, rising again on the third day and spending 40 days and 40 nights, giving them many convincing proofs of his resurrection. Jesus Christ did have the top philosophy. Jesus Christ did fulfill the prophecies given. These books, these ideologies, these philosophies have no prophecy. We have Jesus Christ. We get to, guess what? Know him. It's not a wonder. It's not a hope. It's not looking for a specific thing to happen because you guessed it would happen. It's knowing what Jesus said, putting trust in who he is, putting trust in his word, knowing that we do have sin, that sin is legitimate. It's not something that Camus would just say, it's not even, what are these rules? Let's forget these conventions. It's something that we can look at the Bible and say, these are the very things that are against the nature of God. They're against the will of God, and they are outright treasonous against the one true God. We can turn from them and put our trust in Christ. And that's my hope for RFK, to recognize his own sinfulness. Obviously, we could look at some of the things that he is a proponent of, whether it's drugs, whether it's taking the life of children in the womb, or whether it's collecting pictures and supposedly bragging about it of women that are not his wife. All of those things, that he can put them at the foot of the cross, that he needs to know Jesus Christ, put his trust in him, not just have him as one bigger piece of an ingredient to a pie of syncretism, but ultimately flush these philosophies down the toilet and put his full trust in the risen King. If you haven't done that, I encourage you to do that right now. This has been Chad Davidson. This is the 511 News. Thank you guys so much for watching 511 News. You can check out some of the older episodes as well as the Good Fight radio show and videos we have right here on our YouTube channel. And this week's featured product is Hollywood's War on God. You can check this out at goodfight.org. God bless you guys.